Hey everybody, in my last video, which was called Garden Design, One Room at a Time, I talked a lot about how we define spaces and how those spaces have to be defined in terms of function and in terms of their use. And so we're going to get back to that a little bit today. We're going to be talking about shaping spaces and shaping beds. But before we do that, I wanted to do a little shout out to somebody who has really helped to give me the courage to start Jennifer's Home Journal, to show my face on these videos, and is the reason why I'm sitting in my garden with a cup of coffee today as I start this video. And that person is Helen in Georgia. Helen Wyatt has a YouTube channel. You should check it out. It's a lot of fun. And Helen is the one who's responsible for my building that fountain over there with the lady. She showed me in a video several years ago how to build a bird bath out of concrete. And that got me interested in working with concrete and learning to work with it. And so I'll post about that sometime, but I have Helen to thank for that. And I also have Helen to thank for the fact that I'm willing to show my face on these videos. When I started out, I did all voiceovers, and my girls said to me, "Mom, it's just not very authentic," and it wasn't. But it took me a long time to get to the point where I was comfortable just talking to the camera. I'm a lot more comfortable now. But Helen always does that, and she always sits down with a cup of coffee, and she tells you what she's going to do. So here's a shout out to you, Helen, and thank you for all of your inspiration. Today we're going to be talking about shaping spaces, and shaping beds. So let's get started about how line and shape really function in order to provide a different feeling for the rooms that we create, whether that feeling is formal or whether that feeling is informal. Now, in our last episode, I talked a lot about the fact that whether you're in a small space or in a large space, the task is to define spaces as rooms, but the task is different depending upon whether you're in a small lot like mine, where much of this is already defined for me with existing structures, or whether you're going to have to build some structures or plant some things to service those walls. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about shaping rooms and shaping beds within those rooms. I think about creating outdoor spaces as an artistic endeavor, where your yard is your canvas, and where you're using the same tools that an artist uses, line and shape and form and texture and color and movement, in order to create something beautiful. Now, before you run screaming from the room, "I'm not an artist, I can't draw, I don't have an artistic bone in your body," let me stop you and assure you, yes, you do. If you ever look at something and say, "That's beautiful," you've tapped into the artistic side of your brain. Even if you don't know why you like it, you've tapped into the artistic side of your brain, and every part of your brain can be developed. So let's talk about what it takes to develop that design eye in the garden. And I really think it requires two things. The first is it requires us to learn how to pause whenever we see something that we like and know that we like it, to pause and really ponder, what is it that I like about that? What's happening here that makes me say that's beautiful? Is it how are the lines being used? How is it the shape? Is it the color? What is it about it that you like? See if you can put your finger on it. So that's the first thing, just to pause and try to analyze what is it that you like about a space. The second thing is to learn how to see through the present into the possible. And here, I really think that it's necessary for all of us as gardeners and as people who are trying to envision different spaces to see past what is and to see into what could be. I think a lot about what my mom used to say all the time when she would see a house or a yard that was run down, and she'd say, it has possibilities. And I really think that's how we need to think about this. Artists sketch, When artists sketch, basically they're sketching out ideas. They don't keep all their sketches and they don't act on all their sketches, and you won't either. But it's great to be able to consider the possibilities. In designing this yard, I came up with so many different possibilities before I landed on something that I was like, that's what we're going to do. And you need to give yourself permission to do that as well. So pause and ponder, what is it that you like about a space when you see something you like? And secondly, give yourself the time and the experience and practice and looking past the present and looking for what's possible. A little bit more about learning how to imagine space. When you have a big wide open space and you're trying to decide, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to define that space? Basically what you're going to have to do is imagine walls that aren't there. And in order to do that, if you're like me, you're probably going to need to use some physical objects to help you out. Michael would tell you that he caught me back here in this backyard many times, dropping pieces of wood on the ground and measuring out from the property line and sticking sticks in the ground and even, painting with spray paint on the ground, trying to figure out, like, what would it look like? What would this space look like and feel like? And that gets back to that whole idea about sketching. When you're sketching something, it's fine to erase. It's fine to go back and start over. And so when you're sketching out a plan and you're trying to imagine walls where there are none, use things that are movable. Use things like pieces of lumber or pieces of firewood or strings or a hose or something that'll help you define things visually, and so you can move around in them physically. That's really the only way I can operate, is to sketch using physical objects on the ground and then try to figure out, is this going to work? Is this enough room to move around in? And then from there, I take my measurements and I start sketching on paper. So let's talk for just a minute about the things that you might use in order to define these rooms. So I defined these rooms with the sides of buildings, but if you're on a large lot, you don't have those kinds of things to use. So certainly existing structures are one of the things. Another thing that defines space is your property line. You can't extend into your neighbor's property. You might build fences of various heights. I've got a brick wall here on my property. Back here in the back, I have a rather tall wooden privacy fence. My neighbor has wattle fences in his backyard that he built out of bamboo. So just think about different ways that you can use fences to define space and to kind of build those walls. Another thing that you can use is lines of trees and shrubs. Those build a wall and build a backdrop. A hedge. Maybe you have a retaining wall, or maybe you need to build a retaining wall. Another thing that helps to define space is a berm, and you've heard me talk about berms before. I've got one in mind in the neighborhood that I'll show you in a little while, but that's where you basically pile up dirt and then plant in a very raised bed in order to define the space toward the house. Walkways and steps define your rooms. In this space, I have this long winding pathway that leads from the gate all the way back to the back of the property. And on this side that I'm sitting on against this brick wall over here, that walkway defines the space of this bed that runs from the back wall all the way up to the gate. Another thing that defines space is hardscaping that you already have in place. Maybe you already have a patio in place, or maybe you have a pool surround. So those things define space as well. A pergola, like Rich and Katie have. They have a pergola over a concrete patio. That pergola helps to define and create walls where there are none. Planting a border bed, again, going back to the example with Rich and Katie's yard, we planted that border along the sidewalk because they're in a corner lot. We planted that border along the sidewalk with some shrubs that are going to get pretty high, that are going to provide a wall where one doesn't exist right now. creating things like arbors for entryways, creating raised bed planters. I've seen some beautiful yards. Again, my neighbor has a series of raised bed planters that are in a geometric fashion that look really, really nice. So all of these are ways that you can define space and build those walls. Now, as you're planning, you don't have to nail all that down and be certain about any of it to begin with. As I said, play around with ideas and play around with different, sketch it out in your mind before you land on something and become wedded to it. Also realize that some of your decisions are going to be based on the cost. I mean, there are a lot of things that I would have done in this yard if I could have afforded them. You have to work within a budget. So that's part of the plan as well. So let's take a bit of a walk around and so we can explore shape just a little bit more. And the shapes that you use in your garden do a whole lot to sort of give your garden a different feel. As we take this walk, I'm going to show you some gardens that are very formal and how they create that formal look and feel. And I'm going to show you some gardens that are more informal. But before we go, I wanted to show you a couple of pictures of some formal gardens because we aren't going to see too many formal gardens on this walk. The first one is an aerial view of the Biltmore Estate gardens at the conservatory. And what I wanted you to notice here was this strict use of mirrored symmetry. The one side of the garden is an exact replica of the other. You could fold the garden in half and the two sides would exactly match. That's one of the attributes of formal gardens, is that they're very symmetrical. Now, another aspect of formal and informal gardening is the aspect of balance. And so even when a garden doesn't have strict symmetry, mirrored symmetry, what you're going to see in formal gardens is a lot of attention to balance. The third thing I want to point out is the use of straight lines, as well as the use of shapes that create patterns. And we're going to see that on our walk today. We're going to see how people are using symmetry and straight lines in order to create patterns like these. So here's a good example of a formal garden space. And this is the public side of this house. You'll notice it's very symmetrical. It has a lot of straight lines in it, but the curves are all repeated. So there are 4 corners here. Each of them are repeated with something growing in the middle, 2 pots up by the house, and ferns down here by the street. Notice the use of straight lines and notice the use of strict symmetry. The yard is mirrored on either side. So this is one that I think is a great example of a formal approach. Look how symmetrical it is. On one side of the yard, which is a lot larger than the other, it's pretty open. Maybe they want to use that as a game space or whatever. And on this side, they've got a hedge. Behind that hedge is another room. But this strict symmetry, this mirror symmetry around the doorway, really creates that formal entry, that hallway that is so interesting in houses like this. And here, down at the end of the yard, you can see that they've created this small room here out in more of the public area, but through the gate, they've created a room inside. Okay, I want to show you this yard that is, in my mind, it's pretty formal. There are a lot of formal elements in it, yet it has a lot of informal elements in it as well. It's very much done in a Japanese style. And things are pretty manicured. Again, notice how they've used that corner to anchor the property. And then they've used this bed full of yews in order to create that walkway, that sense of a hallway. And then notice the bonsai tree there. And I think that's what gives it sort of the fact that it's There are so many different elements in here, and they've used shape and the texture of mulch. Stones, a little bit of statuary. It's really a lovely yard. Okay, I said I was going to show you a berm, and you can see the end of the berm down there. We're going to walk toward it. You're going to notice that it is an area that has been raised up. So the center of that berm is probably about 16, 18 inches taller than the ground that I'm standing on. You can see that the trees at the top there are planted into the top of the berm. And then the berm is planted with all of these colorful plants. Now let me show you the effect of this berm on this property. So once again, this house is on a corner lot, and this is a pretty busy street that I'm standing on, as you can tell, because I keep having to turn the camera off in order to speak. But look at what the berm does to anchor this corner and to provide the sense of privacy in the front yard without really blocking the view. And this is a good example of a yard where the already paved structures, the walkways and the steps in the driveway, are doing a lot to create the rooms and are doing a lot to create the spaces. If you look way back there in the background, you can see how they're using the line created by the edge of the grass to create an arched bed in the back there. I love this one. It's anchored by this huge tree out here that has a retaining wall around it. And again, it's using grass to edge the beds and form the beds. You can see that the neighbors have made use of that on their side as well. So I'm in my neighbor's backyard, and she was so kind to let me come back here. So this is what I call my way back. It's her back room. You can see it's her service area, and you can see what's forming the walls. But you turn around here, and there's this lovely little pathway into a very private garden. And she apologized that it's overgrown, but she was lovely enough to let me come in. But look at the way that she's defined this space, both with the shrubs and the trees, as well as with this beautiful gate that provides some structure as well. And then again, she's using some stone to edge, but otherwise it's just using the edge of the pathway and grass to edge the beds. So here's the entrance to that beautiful backyard garden. And notice the use of a iron gate that you can see through with a path beyond it. And here I wanted to show you her use of the shale stones in order to edge the beds. So I'm back from my walk about the neighborhood, showing you some of the gardens that feature some of these different types of lines and shapes. And I hope that this gives you some ideas. Before I go, I wanted to talk for just a second about what it is that I'm trying to do here with Jennifer's Home Journal with all of this. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert. I don't have expertise on anything, much less gardening or garden design. The other day I was talking with some friends who were gardeners, and we were talking about garden clubs. And one of them said to me, "Do you want to join one?" I said, "Yeah, kind of, I do." And she says, "Well, you don't want to join ours. It's not on your level." And I was like, whoa, there are levels of gardening? I mean, I was pretty shaken up by that whole idea. And then I was thinking, am I a bad gardener or a good gardener? And I guess there are levels of gardening, given that there are master gardeners and there are people who have certification in landscape design and landscape architecture. I don't. I just do what my mom taught me. I do what other gardeners have taught me. I do what landscape architects near and far, dead and alive, have taught me. I do what I've learned from other gardeners. And what I'm trying to do here is to provide you with a little inspiration, a little information, and a little encouragement to make your landscape yours and to do what you want to do with it and to be fearless about it. So part of being fearless is being able to make plans and make sketches and explore ideas before you ever stick a shovel in the ground. And that's what this series is about. It's really helping you take control of, here's my space, here's what I want to do with it, and I'm exploring the possibilities. As my mom used to say, that yard has possibilities. So explore yours.